Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. It's 7:01 here in the United States on the East Coast. And so, good day to everyone. Thank you very much for being with us today. Um, we're very happy to have two very excellent speakers and an introduction from our colleague Mary Melnick at USAID. So this webinar today is part of a series on big cats and linear infrastructure. We had our first webinar on February 1st, and it focused on the impacts of linear infrastructure on snow leopards. And then we had another one last week that really looked at how linear infrastructure, sustainable linear infrastructure is being carried out in India for big cats, in particular for tigers. So we were provided with some excellent ideas on implementation and examples from the field. So today we're going to look at the research behind looking at linear infrastructure and its impacts on big cats and solutions to that problem. And we're going to look at some examples. So I'm going to I'm sorry, I should say that this webinar series is hosted by the Align project, which is a USAID funded project that is a collaboration between WWF, the Center for Large Landscape Conservation, and again, USAID as our funder and partner. So I would like to pass the word to Mary Melnick, who's going to be kicking off our webinar today. Mary is the Environmental Security and Resilience Division Chief at USAID's Asia Bureau. Over to you, Mary.
Thank you so much, Tremi, and a warm welcome to everyone. On behalf of USAID, I would also like to welcome everyone, and we're very pleased and delighted to be co-hosting this series of webinars with WWF and the Center for Large Landscape Conservation. I'd like to also warmly welcome and thank Drs. Belal Habib and Neil Carter. We're very fortunate to have such premier experts on this topic of designing and building linear infrastructure. I'd like to really also kick off on describing why this work is so important. It's a solution to key development challenges of the biodiversity and climate crises, and the intersection for the need for improved infrastructure and greater connectivity among communities, cities, and countries across Asia. Maintaining wildlife and healthy ecosystems protects the web of life, that is the biodiversity that all of us depend upon. And certainly, if you're talking about biodiversity as the fabric of life as well, we have snow leopards, which are the silver thread, and tigers, which are the golden thread. And we'll be hearing about tigers today. These healthy ecosystems are enormously important for the climate challenge. They sequester carbon, they avoid emissions. They also build resilience to climate-related weather shocks. Today, through Align, we want to demonstrate that conservation and construction, so to speak, are not an either or, but a both and. Our goal is to explain how you can design wildlife-friendly infrastructure based on research and case studies. Just a little bit about the Align project. It stands for Asia's Linear Infrastructure Safeguarding Nature, and it is working to go to scale to have these practices adopted and implemented. And we're doing that together through improving policies, demonstrating best practices, as well as building capacity. And we certainly welcome you visiting our Align website and the predecessor project implemented by the Center for Large Landscape Conservation and Perez Group on the LISA project, which has right now capacity building modules. So we are hosting these webinars to raise awareness of what is possible among the conservation community, as well as for engineers and government ministries, students, and a large group of stakeholders. We want to go to scale. We want to implement these help support governments implement this at the national level and as well as cross-border. So today we continue on the how to build wildlife-friendly infrastructure from the perspective of scientists. I personally have been asked, is there evidence to support the notion that these types of infrastructure are wildlife friendly? Well, we're going to learn how to get the science right. And yes, this is working. These are big investments, so we have to get it right. Together we have the pieces, we have the people here today, the people who are listening, the people who will listen to the recordings, government ministries and engineers and financial investors. So let's pull it all together and work together to change our current biodiversity crisis, as well as the climate challenges and the need for improved economic growth and prosperity. Thank you so much. Back to Tremi.
Thank you so much, Mary. It's such a pleasure to have you here today and to be working with you on this project. When I came to WWF a year ago and learned about the Align project, I thought, wow, this is really how I had always imagined it should be done. So thank you so much. Okay, I would like now to pass the microphone to my colleague at WWF, Kate Vanelli. Kate is based in Tanzania at WWF Tanzania, and she leads the Living with Big Cats initiative. Thanks so much for moderating our webinar today, Kate, and pass the word to you.
Thanks so much, Tremi, and thank you, Mary, for those fantastic introductory remarks. Really set up the stage well. So I'll just say a few words and then we'll get started. But as Mary mentioned, in today's webinar, we're learning about designing and building infrastructure safeguards for big cats, but specifically the research and case studies on successful approaches. And we will be hearing from two scientists on the impacts of linear infrastructure on big cats, as well as the effectiveness of solutions. So first of all, why do big cats matter? And I could talk about this for hours, but I will spare you guys. But essentially, conserving big cats means conserving so much more. Big cats are highly monitored, wide-ranging. They play a vital role in their environments, which makes them clear and compelling indicators of biodiversity. They can be and are measured in a timely, cost-effective way, and their numbers can help paint a broader picture of biodiversity, climate, and humans' relationship with nature. In fact, the ranges of the 40 species of wildcats actually overlap with 75% of the world's key biodiversity areas. And additionally, big cats help preserve nature's contributions to people through their vast habitats, from food, water, livelihoods to buffers against disease and carbon storage. In fact, more than 2 billion people live in the river basins that overlap with snow leopard range, and these snow leopard headwaters are important water sources to local and downstream human communities. Jaguar Range, for example, provides 17% of the world's carbon storage and sequestration and directly benefits 53 million people in Latin America. And lions have a major effect on Africa's GDP through tourism. Foreign tourists contributed over 30 billion to the countries of sub-Saharan Africa in just 2017 alone, and lions are a favorite with visitors in protected areas. So the existing interest in and focus on big cats can help inform science-based decision-making, which is vital in a rapidly transforming and developing world. So why is linear infrastructure a problem for big cats? The construction and operation of transport infrastructure has been identified as one of the most impactful drivers of biodiversity loss, and it's estimated that 90% of new roads will be in developing countries, with many landscapes largely intact, witnessing their first road between 2010 and 2050. So what does this have to do with big cats? Because they are wide-ranging with large habitat requirements, the risks are numerous. Habitat fragmentation and degradation, which can lead to impact on population numbers and health, and inter and intra-specific competition over territory. And also the creation of access to previously inaccessible areas can lead to increases in human-wildlife conflict, increased poaching, unsustainable development of tourism infrastructure, and increased forest encroachment, illegal hunting, and illegal transportation of wild animals and their products. Additionally, there's increased risk of wildlife vehicle collisions, introduction of invasive species, and there is a risk that big cats will be unable to find mates, hunt, find cover, and establish their own territories. So with our knowledge on how to protect, recover, and monitor big cats, combined with their mobilizing power, just look at tigers, for example, they make a compelling case to create links between conservation and development to lead to transformative change. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Neil Carter, who is an associate professor in conservation science at the School for Environment and Sustainability at the University of Michigan. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Neil. Thank you.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? And hopefully you can see the PowerPoint now.
Yes.
Super, great. Well, thanks everyone. Thank you, Kate, and all of you that are attending. First, I'd like to extend my appreciation to USAID, WWF, and the Center for Large Landscape Conservation for hosting this webinar and inviting me to present. This is an urgent topic, and I'm so glad to be hearing about all of this effort and recognition of the topic, and to see venues like this that are bringing folks together to understand the problem and perhaps more importantly to discuss solutions. Kate summarized this really well, so I'll do it quickly. But there are numerous studies that have shown that around the world, linear infrastructure, including roads and railways, can act as major barriers to animal movement and fragment habitats. They can reduce gene flow. They directly increase mortality due to collisions with vehicles. Roads can also provide access to previously remote areas, which can facilitate human settlement growth, increase natural resource extraction and hunting and poaching of wildlife. And finally, with respect to transportation infrastructure, that also increases overall traffic disturbance on these wildlife. So lots of impacts and a fair amount of research on these impacts around the world. However, with all these impacts that have been documented for species around the world, surprisingly, there has been little done to assess the impacts of roads on tigers. And this is especially surprising given that tigers are in places with high levels of human densities and infrastructure development. Now, as we know, tigers are a globally endangered species. There are only about 5,000 individuals that are isolated in relatively small populations that are scattered across various countries in Asia and Russia. What we do know about road impacts to tigers comes from a handful of studies. So for example, in the Russian Far East, a study found that roads reduce the survival of tigers due to collisions with vehicles, as well as due to the increase in poaching access to some of the forested areas. A study in Sumatra found that tigers clearly avoided areas that were closer to public roads, suggesting that those roads were barriers to movement. So we still have many unknowns, such as the full extent of impacts from roads at broad spatial scales, the scales that much of policy on roads are being made. We also don't know much about the influence of roads on tiger behaviors. So more research on this topic is sorely needed. So today I'm going to talk about some of our efforts to address those knowledge gaps. I'll start by talking about our broad scale risk assessment of road encroachment into the entire tiger range currently and in the future using some forecasts. And this is work that was published in 2020 in Science Advances. Then I'll take a few minutes to discuss work we're doing that's using GPS collars to investigate how tigers in Nepal behaviorally responded to road networks before and after the COVID-19 lockdown. And this paper was published in 2023 in Global Ecology and Conservation. And then for each of these, I'll conclude with some recommendations for implementing smart green infrastructure or tiger-friendly infrastructure that account for tigers and their needs. For our first analysis, we utilized a global roads dataset to investigate road densities in tiger conservation landscapes, focusing also on road densities inside and outside protected areas within tiger landscapes. And we found that there are currently 134,000 kilometers of roads in tiger habitats across their range. And we can see this distribution looking at the map here on the left, with each of these tiger conservation landscapes associated with a certain road density. And in the bottom left, there's a panel that shows the road densities for the protected area regions and the non-protected area regions of these tiger conservation landscapes per country. And I should note that this estimate of 134,000 kilometers is likely an underestimate, as the global road data set often doesn't include some of the smaller local roads in some of these areas. Interestingly, road density is 34% greater in non-protected portions of the tiger conservation landscapes than in strictly protected portions, but there are some important exceptions to this. If you were to look at the bar chart again at the bottom left, we see that Cambodia, Malaysia, and Russia, for example, have road densities inside their protected areas that are greater than outside the protected areas within the tiger conservation landscapes. And there's also a huge amount of variation in road densities by country. So for example, China has 8 times the road density on average than in Malaysia in our tiger conservation landscapes. So lots of variation and fairly high densities of roads based on this global road data set in tiger conservation landscapes. The next part of this analysis, we estimated the mean reduction in tiger abundances as a function of distances from those roads. And this function shows a decreasing abundance with increasing proximity to roads. And the function is derived from a meta-analysis that was published a number of years ago that included 33 different mammal species, including large carnivores like grizzlies, bobcats, and wolves. So we calculated the mean species abundance for tigers using this function in 4 different range categories based on the IUCN range map that was published a few years ago. And crucially, this map specifies areas where there is detected tiger presence, as well as where tiger breeding has been detected. So these are critical areas, priority areas for tiger conservation. So here on the left, we're seeing the results of that mean species abundance, and a lower number means that roads are suppressing the abundances of tigers and their prey. And we've got it broken up by these 4 different categories from the IUCN Tiger Range Map. And to summarize some of our results here, we found that the current road network might be reducing populations of tigers and their prey by about 20% across the entire tiger range. And concerningly, 43% of the areas where tiger breeding were detected are affected by roads. And this is indicated by having a mean species abundance that's less than 0.95. And a quarter of the area where tigers have been detected based on the IUCN range map are in fact heavily affected by roads. And this is indicated by having an MSA that's less than 0.5, meaning that roads are suppressing abundances by at least half. And protected areas aren't immune from road encroachment. 40% of them are influenced by roads. So the key takeaway here is that roads are not only pervasive, but they're encroaching into some of the most critical areas for tiger survival, like areas where tiger breeding is occurring. With these spatial data sets, we can visualize where roads and their likely impacts to tigers and their prey are located. So here are 4 examples on the bottom of tiger conservation landscapes that fall into different regions of the tiger range. And they show the variation of where road networks are distributed and how their impacts are concentrated. The numbers that are listed next to the name of the conservation landscape corresponds to the locations in that tiger range map in the top left. So we can see that these are places all over the tiger range, places where there's been breeding, places where there's suspected tiger presence, but they haven't been detected yet, places where they've been extirpated. And you can see that there's huge variation in the distribution of roads and the impacts of those roads in these important and critical areas for tigers. We've provided these data freely at the link shown below. So if you're interested, you're welcome to go download it and take a look and explore them and integrate them into your own planning. We're also hoping to update these analyses as we have new data sets for roads. And there's been a new version 3.0 for tiger conservation landscapes that would be important to look at here. The last part of this analysis is that we took some basic estimates and assumptions about and forecasted what road densities might look like in tiger conservation landscapes by 2050. And we found that in the next 30 years or so, compared to current levels, we estimate 24,000 kilometers of new roads might be built in tiger habitats. And again, this is an underestimate because in this case, Myanmar wasn't included in the forecast. Now, India, as you can see from the chart here, is really dominating much of this growth. For example, India is projected to add 14,500 kilometers of new roads, and this is a 32% increase in road length from current levels. And Nepal and Bhutan are projected to add a proportionally greater amount of roads than in any other country. For example, Nepal is adding 43% new roads, and Bhutan is adding 40% more roads over current levels by the year 2050. So some takeaways from this work here is that the degree of existing and future road encroachment into tiger habitats is highly troubling and underscores the urgency of minimizing impacts of linear infrastructure to biodiversity. And protected areas do appear to limit growth of road networks, but recall that some regions still had high road densities even inside protected areas. So this is still going to be a critical issue in managing protected areas for tigers in the future. But especially concerning is the high road densities outside protected areas. Yet these areas comprise a substantial portion of the tiger's current range. So these road networks strongly constrain the capacity of tiger recovery outside protected areas, for example, in habitat corridors that we know are vital for sustaining tiger populations under global change. Finally, and I'm going to reiterate this a couple times, maintaining roadless areas is so important because once construction begins, it's frankly too late. The deleterious effects are largely irreversible. And so wherever possible, avoiding roads is our best option to enhance tiger recovery in human-dominated landscapes. Now I want to drill down a little bit for the second part, and like to talk about a project for a few minutes we started in 2021 to better understand how tigers are behaviorally interacting with the National Mahindra Highway in Nepal. And the highway is shown here in red on this map. And we focused on the highway because it not only passes by or through tiger source sites in Nepal, but is also gradually undergoing expansion from 2 to 4 lanes to support greater traffic volumes and speeds. So there's an urgent need to understand what the impacts of that expansion may be on biodiversity and tigers and how to minimize those impacts. So we placed a GPS collar on one female in Bardia National Park in Western Nepal. Bardia is a well-recognized area with high tiger density and substantial tourist and park management infrastructure. For example, Army guards control traffic through the park using a timed entry-exit system. That is, when you come to the gate, you receive a ticket with a timestamp on it, and you have to exit the other end within a time frame, or you're fined at the guard post on the other side. So in this case, traffic, while relatively high volume, is regulated and predictable, and it likely poses a smaller disturbance to wildlife than if it's unregulated traffic. We also collared one male tiger in Parsa National Park in central Nepal. Parsa is the newest national park, and it has much less tourist and management infrastructure. It also has a lower tiger density than Bardia. And importantly, unlike Bardia, speed limits are not enforced. Having been to this location several times, vehicles drive fast, and many of them are large trucks transporting goods across the international border with India. So these GPS collars give us a very detailed understanding of these animals' movements and relationships to the highway, accounting for the fact that the two sites have varying traffic management systems. A few months after these two animals had been collared, Nepal entered a nationwide lockdown due to the COVID-19 pandemic, whereby road traffic dramatically reduced along the highway. And this reduction in traffic provided us a natural experiment to examine how changing traffic volumes affect tiger behaviors along the highway. So here we're looking at some results of this and focusing on home range analyses. At the very top here is the male animal, the male tiger, and at the bottom panels are the female tiger. And at the very left, we're looking at the pre-lockdown period, and here in the middle is during the lockdown. So we can see that pre-lockdown, the male tiger is clearly hemmed in or constrained by the highway. He usually walked parallel to the road, and he almost never crossed the highway. However, after the lockdown, when traffic mostly ceased, he almost immediately began crossing more often, and his home range expanded dramatically to the west, nearly tripling in size. He maintained this much larger home range even after the lockdown ended. The female, on the other hand, on the bottom panel, moved from west to the east side, and she shrunk her home range in half after the lockdown. The reasons for the shrinking home range are unclear, but we think that after lockdown, she felt more comfortable spending more of her time where prey congregate instead of avoiding road disturbances. So we ran some step selection functions to better understand what factors statistically influenced the animal movements decisions. And we included the location of the highway, time of day, and we also looked at how permeable the highway was. And I just want to walk through a couple of these results because they're very interesting and informative about how these animals respond to the highway and what happened during the lockdown. For example, we found that the male strongly avoided areas near the highway, while the female preferentially selected areas close to the highway. The highway also negatively affected landscape permeability for both tigers, but especially for the male. This means that the animals were less able to walk freely across the highway because they were trying to avoid it. The lockdown lessened the male's avoidance of the highway, whereas the female was even more attracted to the highway. And then finally, we found that the highway became much more permeable to both the male and female tiger after the lockdown than before the lockdown. So I want to drill down into that a little bit more. So now what we're looking at are the selection strengths, their habitat selection strengths by distance to the highway. The distance is shown here on the x-axis. And we broke it up into two categories of time. Daytime is showed in the red, and nighttime is shown in the blue. Again, males on the top and females on the bottom of these panels. And we found that, again, the male avoided the road pre-lockdown. For example, during the day, he was over 3 times more probable to select a location 2 kilometers away from the road than only 100 meters away. But the lockdown eased that avoidance. Meanwhile, the female stays close to the highway during the daytime, and during lockdown, she is less likely to avoid locations further from the road. But I think the story gets way more interesting when we look at the permeability. That is, how likely these animals were to cross the highway. So again, we're looking at it during daytime in red and nighttime in blue. And we found that the male was 11 times more probable to not cross the highway than to cross it during the day in general. But after the lockdown, he was 3 times more probable to cross the highway than before the lockdown. For the female, after the lockdown, the highway became more permeable during the day, and she was over 2 times more probable to cross it than before the lockdown. We were able to use these crossing locations of both tigers to estimate an optimal location to place a wildlife crossing structure, which is shown here for both the male and the female. And we're only showing 1 crossing location per site, but we could include more if that were necessary. So these are data-driven recommendations that can be used by road planners in coming years when considering road improvement projects in the area. So takeaways here, the highway clearly constrains and alters tiger movements, but especially for the male in Parsa, who clearly avoided areas near the highway, and he definitely avoided crossing it until traffic ceased during the lockdown. The fact that the female in Bardia seems less affected by the highway than the male is largely attributed, in my opinion, to how traffic is being managed between the 2 sites. In Bardia, it is regulated, and that appears to lessen its disturbance on the movements of the female. Regardless, both tigers appeared to respond quite quickly to reduce traffic volumes on the highway during the lockdown. And this is encouraging because it suggests that if road packs are mitigated, their influence on tiger behavior might be temporary, and that landscape connectivity can be restored rapidly in conjunction with continued habitat protection. And then finally, based on these results, we have some general recommendations for mitigating roads in tiger country. And as I mentioned before, I mean, in the case of the Mahendra National Highway in Nepal, it's really important to avoid increasing the number of lanes of the highway when we're going through these priority forests, whether it be places where we have high numbers of tigers or breeding tigers or dispersing tigers. The extent to which we can avoid increasing the road footprint or transportation infrastructure footprint is going to be so important. And likewise, we should avoid creating new roads in priority forests at all costs. Now, where roads do exist, building crossing structures is important, and building them in optimal crossing locations is going to be the most cost-effective way to do that. Reducing and enforcing speed limits, such as signs, speed bumps, speed traps, and strict fines. I think that this could be a relatively low-hanging approach to reducing overall traffic disturbance. We saw that during the pandemic, how quickly these animals responded to the cessation of traffic. And so there are ways that you can control and regulate traffic is going to be really useful. And another interesting way that we could do this is thinking about limiting traffic volume at night. We know from research that animals are becoming more nocturnal under human disturbances, and tigers are already very nocturnal. So the extent to which we can limit traffic volume and disturbance at night can be an important way to reduce that disturbance at critical periods of time for these animals. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time and attention. I really look forward to answering any questions you might have. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carter. That was such an interesting presentation, and especially looking at the COVID, pre-COVID and post-COVID impacts of traffic and traffic regulation, especially this is such an illustrative example of why we need to link up science with policy and development. So really, thank you so much for that. And we'll do questions at the end. So now I would like to introduce Dr. Balil Habib, who is a conservation biologist with the Wildlife Institute of India. So I'll go ahead and hand the microphone to Dr. Habib.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good morning and good afternoon. I think, is it visible, my presentation? And
Yes.
am I audible?
Yes, looks great.
Yes, so thanks, Neil, for putting the background so it's easy for me now to explain the other things. So I'll be mostly talking about the implementation of different infrastructures, which we have done in last couple of years, and how these structures are performing. And what actually we need to think about when we are talking about mitigation measures for big cats, whether these are tigers, leopards, snow leopards, and other things. And I think most of us, when we are talking about big cats, till last year we had 4, now we have 5 big cats. So when we are talking about the mitigation measures, I think probably we are talking about most of the big cats which are in our country. And why we need to think about this linear infrastructure, why it's so important for us now. So if you look, we have something around 1,000 protected areas in India. And when you talk about the average size of these protected areas, it's something around 200 square kilometers. So if you want tigers to survive for next 100 years, you need a protected area, the core protected area without human disturbance, which should be something like 1,000 square kilometers. Do we have a single protected area in India and Nepal or in the neighboring countries with a core area without any human intervention, which is 1,000 square kilometers? No, it's impossible. So if you see these dark green areas, these are the protected areas, and the light green is a forest between them. So our tiger reserves, they can only sustain tigers if our tigers are able to move from one protected area to other protected area as a meta population, because we don't have enough large protected areas in our country. But when these tigers, they decide to go from one protected area and other, that's what it is. So this is just an amount of a road network which is in our country. Just imagine putting a railway network, power lines, canals on it. So that's another form of linear infrastructure which is important. So that's why we are talking that the conservation of the tigers, the long-term conservation of and management of the tigers is impossible if tigers are not able to go from one protected area to other protected area. That means movement is very crucial. And when these animals decide to move, they encounter a lot of linear infrastructure. And the reality is like this. So you have a forest patch, you have human habitations, then you have all these roads, which these animals have to cross when they are going from one protected area to other protected area. It's not only about building new infrastructure, it's again upgradation of the existing infrastructure, because we have a lot of demand for high-speed roads because the population is increasing, number of vehicles on the road is increasing, so which puts more and more pressure on these linear infrastructure. And how far? And these smaller forest areas, they become very critical for these animals when they go from one particular area to other particular area. So how many protected areas we need to protect, how many forest patches we need to protect when these animals are going to go from one place to other place, and how this linear infrastructure is actually influencing their movement when they are trying to go from one protected area to other protected area. And this is the road network across the globe. And if you just zoom in to India, and I think we are the second largest country in terms of a road network. And when we talk about the railways, we are the one among the third largest country in the world. And when you talk about other transmission lines, you talk about human population, you talk about the population of livestock in our country, we are one among second, third, or the fourth country in the world. So all this, whether it's a human disturbance, whether it's a presence of the roads, railway lines, transmission lines, they all impact the movement of these animals from protected area. And people also want high-speed roads. And we have the amount of the population we are having, everybody wants to travel faster from one place to other place. So this is in direct conflict with conservation in our country. And see what has happened in last 10 years. 63% increase in rural population. We have 63% rural population in our country. And we have something 94% increase in rural roads in last 5 years. That means the amount of roads which we had in rural areas in our country, they have increased by 95% in last 5 years. Railway electrification in our country has increased by 1000% in last 10 years. What is the meaning of a railway electrification? It's simple, it's a fast moving trains. So if a railway line was accommodating 5 trains, now if they are very fast moving trains, they are going to accommodate 20 trains. So more and more traffic. 4-lane highways in our country has doubled in last 10 years. There's a 59% increase in national highway length in last 10 years. This is in terms of an infrastructure. And when we talk about in terms of a biodiversity, something like 1,000 protected areas, 4 biodiversity hotspots, 53 tiger reserves, and 70% of the global population of the tigers. And 30% of this tiger population is outside protected areas. They have to go from one particular place to other particular place. So that's the issue. And now see the divide. Then we talk about the rural versus urban India. So we have 1,458 kilometers of roads per 1,000 square kilometer. But when we talk about the urban areas, we have 5,296. Though this is a divide between the rural versus the urban area. So this also reflects the amount of the growth which will be required in the coming days, because all our rural areas will try to be like more urbanized. And when we talk in terms of the people, so there's a 1.44 kilometer per 1,000 people in rural areas, whereas in urban areas, it's a 5 kilometers, 5.5 kilometers of a road available to the 1,000 people in urban areas. So there's a huge difference. So what government is trying to do, government is trying to pitch this difference. They're trying to reduce this particular difference so that we are going to be a developed nation. And this is what is happening. You have a road, you have a railway line, you have a canal, and they are all bifurcating our protected areas. They're all bifurcating our forests. And important is not our protected areas, like yes, protected areas, they buffer the development of the new roads, but only protected areas are not going to save tigers, because these tigers, they have to go from one particular place to other particular place, considering the size of the protected areas in most of our these developing countries. And this is, so can we think that it's possible to manage a development which is beneficial for conservation? And we have two types of roads. One is a greenfield development, which is like new roads, and other is a brownfield development, which is like old roads. And in our country, most of the existing roads are up for development. Now we can't stop these particular roads because they are already there. If the road is there for 100 years, we can't come and say that, okay, this road can't be developed further. And now it's not a road which has an impact on the wildlife or the tigers. It's the amount of traffic which is on that particular road. More and more we are developing, more and more traffic we have on this particular roads, which is going to impact our system. And for new roads, we have an amazing policy in our country. What our country says right now, no new roads through protected areas, wildlife corridors, and sensitive wildlife habitats. So that's a policy now. So if there is no option, go for 100% mitigation. So we don't have so much of an issue with new roads, but we have an issue with the existing roads. So this is an example. It's a 700 kilometer express highway. It's one of the longest highway in India, which was developed in last 5 years. And this highway does not pass through any one of the protected area. And we have more than 1,700 mitigation measures on this particular highway. And the bridge you are seeing is one of the world's biggest overpass as on today, which is there in India for the movement of these animals. And if you see these bridges, now this is a human dominated landscape, and these overpasses are now used by the leopards to go from one place to other place. Imagine an express highway outside protected areas, non-touching any protected area, and now animals are using these overpasses to go from one place to other place. And there are so many structures. There are 1,700 mitigation measures on this particular highway, and most of this highway is not going through any protected areas. But the issue is with brownfield projects, with brownfield projects which are already there, which are coming for upgradation. And it's very difficult to stop the development of these particular roads, because these roads have been there from last 100 years or so. And now issue is there are a lot of different conservation ideas. Some people give this particular idea. You develop a road on both left and right side and keep this road as such inside a protected area. And this is going to be the most damaging sort of a development, because if we are going to do this, most of the traffic is going to be bumper to bumper inside protected areas. And this will result in the barrier impact created by the vehicles. So not a single tiger or other wildlife will be allowed to go from one particular place to other particular place. Now also the development, when we talk about the mitigation measures, they have to be very specific. Like, what are the places where these mitigation measures are to be constructed? They have to be measurable. We should be able to measure the success of these mitigation measures. And at the same time, they should be achievable. Achievable in the sense, can I tell we can have a 10 kilometers of an overpass? Do all these developing nations have that much of a money to put for the mitigation measures which are not achievable? And at the same time, they should be realistic. So if I'm going to tell we have to make these particular mitigation measures, are they realistic? And the most important is they should be timely. We can't afford any further delays. We can't think about, okay, we can build these mitigation measures after 10 years, after 15 years, because we are going to lose most of these animals if these things are not on timely basis. And most important for the people who are working on the road ecology, if there's a mistake, if we have made a mitigation measures at a wrong place, this mistake is for next 100 years, because it's impossible to destroy that structure and ask for a new structure. What should be the size of this particular structure? How big the structure can be? Can we have a multiple smaller structures or larger big structures? So those are the important questions which we have to ask when we stop talking about the mitigation measures, because a mistake done is a mistake for 100 years. And we are only living in a conservation scarce, penny scarce conservation scenarios, where it's very difficult for us to have a more and more resource to rectify our mistakes. And this is like, we have built one of the first mitigation measures in India. These were 9 structures. Now see, and we have started monitoring these mitigation measures from last 5 years, and see the year 1, 2019, there were 5,673 captures of animals under these structures. And down the line after 2021, we had 19,000 structures. So there is almost 200% increase increase of the use of these structures by the wildlife. So what we are telling our policymakers, so there are 20,000 crossings. Imagine we have saved 20,000 road accidents. If these animals were on road, there was a possibility that there is an accident, there's a loss of human life, and there's a damage of human life. So we are not only working for the wildlife, it's actually saving people also from these ill effects of the road which are there. And this is not only the tigers, we have 21 different species using these underpasses. So we are thinking about tigers, and there's a suite of other species which are using these underpasses. And it's not, so we also try to see, are our crossing structures performing perfectly like what is happening in the natural habitat? Yes. Most of the crossing structures are better than the adjacent habitats, and not so good when we talk about the forest. Yes, there's an impact, but you can mitigate that impact at least till 80 to 90%. And then we are also talking about the different sizes of the structures. So we had a structure from 50 meter to 750 meters. So how these different sizes of the structures influence the use by the wildlife. And not all animals react same. So as soon as these mitigation measures were ready, there were some species which just started using these mitigation measures within 10 to 15 days. But there are some animals which almost took 90 days to use that particular structure, because every species has a different tolerance. If you are thinking about Indian wolf, barking deer, chausinga, four-horned antelope, these animals almost took 6 months to use these structures. So different species have a different way looking towards mitigation measures. So we need to be very patient. So if we think that, oh, these our wildlife is not crossing these structures, they also need some time to get used to these particular structures. And most important, you see, this is the size of the structures, and we are talking about the species. Almost all sizes, starting from 50 meter to 750 meter, they have all these particular species. Because when we are talking about the mitigation measures, it's a lot of money. So we have to be logical, what size fits all. So if you see, if you take all these species, whether the structure is a 50 meter, whether the structure is a 750 meter, all these species use. But when you go more bigger, when you go larger, so you have a specific species, rare species, which are going to use these underpasses and overpasses in that particular landscape. And when we talk about the tigers, if you increase the size of the underpasses, it doesn't influence the tiger. So after a minimum size, say around 200 to 300 meters of an underpass, if you will start building an underpasses of 800 meters, 900 meters, they don't influence tiger crossings. So most of the underpasses up to 200 to 300 meters are perfectly fine for the tiger, for the tigers. And this is the species wild dogs. So for wild dogs, these underpasses were not just for going from one place to other place. They have done everything under these underpasses. They started hunting, they started chasing other individuals. So for wild dogs, it was it was like a hunting ground than just a crossing structures. So imagine 10 years before, while the wild dogs are hunting, it was a road. So you have taken all those negative impacts back and given this space to the wildlife, and they are enjoying it. And now see the leopards. And we have these the level, the amount of, if more tigers are using underpasses, definitely the less leopards are going to use these underpasses, but still they are using these underpasses. And how many all these structures. So in last couple of years, this 9 kilometer stretch is used by 20 tigers. We have 21 unique tigers using this structure, which is just the 9 kilometers of a road, and nine structures on this particular road. And you see, if you see this, these are the different sizes of the structures and the unique individuals which we have. So we have something around 7 tigers using the same structure, which is a slightly bigger structure, which is used by different tigers. So if you want different types of tigers, different unique individuals to cross, what should be the size of these structures? And you see that, and none of these structures are demographic filters. We have a females with a cubs of 8 months, with a cubs of 3 months, all going together and using these underpasses, because it's very important when we talk about these underpasses, they should not be demographic filters. They should not allow the males to cross and females are not particular. We have an issue with the elephants. There's an issue with African elephants also. We have developed mitigation measures, but only the males are using these, and it acts as a demographic filter for the females. So we also have to think about these particular aspects. And this is again one of our highways. This highway was around 100-year old, and we have to cut something around 7,000 trees. Lot of people were up against us. Why we are developing this, why we are making this road bigger and cutting these 700 trees. And the logic was this: we are cutting these 700 trees because only for the reason we are trying to restore the connectivity which we have lost 50 years before. So we can afford to lose some of the trees only if we are going to maintain the connectivity of the landscape. And if you see this particular figure, this red color is the road, and this road was built 100 years before, and there were no tigers going on the forest, which is on the left side. So by making this road wildlife friendly, by developing mitigation measures, you have a 2,000 square kilometer of the landscape which is back to tigers. So you have lost 7,000 trees, but you have converted this forest, which was empty forest, which was without tigers, into a tiger heaven, which is like a win-win conservation situation. And also, like, good science is always the backbone of road ecology. If you don't have a good science, I think we are not able to justify, because the mitigation measures is a costly thing. And we are talking about developing nations. They can't afford to spend 10% of their GDP in developing the mitigation measures, where half of the people sleep without a dinner. So you have to have a policy where the mitigation measures are appropriate. Now you see, there's a mitigation measures which was built for the gibbons. Gibbons never used it. A small mistakes. Gibbons can't use a square pole because they are evolved to use circular branches. So a very small mistake, a mitigation measure put for a gibbon without knowing the ecology of a species always. So we have to understand what's the ecology of that particular species. Can a species use that particular mitigation measures? 90% of the people in developing countries think that roadkill hotspots are the places where the mitigation measures are to be built. No way, because roadkill hotspots change over time. You may have a roadkill hotspot today at one place. After 6 months, you will have it at other place. So can you keep on moving your mitigation measures? So you have to go in more detailed analysis to see whether this roadkill hotspot is really a hotspot, or there are some better places where animals are actually crossing, not dying. So this is a place where animals are dying, but there will be many other places which are better for making a mitigation measures. And it's like road ecology is an ecology plus traffic engineering. It's about knowing animals. It's about how animals are using this particular landscape, how animals are moving. And it's also understanding about traffic ecology. What's the amount of traffic? What type of traffic it is in. So for example, we were trying to look the variation in traffic heterogeneity. If we have only small cars versus if we have a trucks. If we have a road where the amount of vehicles are 5,000 and they are small cars, and if we have a road where the amount of vehicles are 5,000, but there are trucks in that particular road, so the mitigation measures are to be different. The impact on the wildlife is totally different, because the more the traffic heterogeneity, higher is the chances that these vehicles will become a barrier effect for this particular species. in our country, we also have to talk about the disturbance, because as soon as you put a mitigation measure, there will be a disturbance. People will start using that particular structure. So how big should be your mitigation measure so that it should be able to tolerate that particular disturbance, so that if people are using that particular structure, most of the times you have to avoid that people should not use it. But if at some places people start using that particular structure, your structure should be large enough that that disturbance is not going to impact the movement of the animal. So that this particular aspect also has to be considered. And we also try to look, if we have a smaller structures, they become death traps, prey trap hypothesis. But for example, if the tiger have started using a particular underpass, is they going to use that particular underpass? Because over the time, our predators will realize that, oh, it's easy, wait there, the prey will come and we will capture that particular prey. So we also have to think what size is not going to impact the movement of the other prey species when we are talking about the size of these particular mitigation measures. And again, what I'm bringing this slide back to focus on one very important thing. We have a huge existing road network in our India. And what we are thinking, that this road work, when it's going to come for upgradation, has to be an opportunity for conservation. Because if this road network is not going to come for upgradation, we are not going to have an options for mitigation. The options of mitigations are only possible if the government comes and says that, oh, we have to make this road bigger, and we are going to tell them you can only make this road wider if you have a mitigation measure. That is a only opportunity for us to focus the mitigation measures on that particular road. Otherwise, the traffic will keep on increasing and we are going to lose the functional connectivity between our protected areas. And today, when we started in 2014, we were thinking that we are going to build the first mitigation measures. At that particular time, the biggest underpass was in Malaysia, which was around 275 meters long. But today, the world's 10 largest mitigation measures are in our country. So we have moved forward in these last 10 years, and we can proudly say that India has built a linear infrastructure, which is an example for the rest of the globe to see. All the 10 largest underpasses and overpasses are in India as of now. And with this, there's a whole group of people who support this particular research and who was working with me. So it's an acknowledgement for all of them. So I'm presenting on behalf of them, and thank you so much. If there are any questions, we can take them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Habib. That was such an interesting presentation, and just really your visuals here were so powerful, looking at the road networks across India and globally, and it just really illustrates such a success story that India has prioritized these wildlife crossings and mitigation measures and managed to increase tiger populations. So it's really inspiring to hear you speak about this, and thank you so much. I'm sure on behalf of everyone. We have some time for questions. I just wanted to ask a few. Maybe I saw, Neil, you might have answered these in the chat, but I'll ask just for the general group. We have a question that says, can the behavior of two tigers represent species level trends and behaviors?
That's a great question. No, I mean, sort of by definition, two animals, it's probably inappropriate to make inferences on the entire population or species level. Nonetheless, I think what was really interesting about the research was how convincing and immediate the reactions of both animals to the reduction of traffic, which leads me to think that this is probably not just anomalous among the two animals, that this is probably something that's more a characteristic of tigers that are interacting with the highway. Having said that, we saw that the two animals responded in nuanced ways. I mean, the female did different things than the male, and we largely think that that's because of how traffic is managed between the two sites. It could also be because of the life history of the animals and the different stages in their lives of where they were, and the distribution of mates and prey and that kind of thing. But I really have a strong reason to think that regardless of the direction of the response or the magnitude, I think that both animals responding so swiftly and so clearly to that change in traffic indicates that there's a good likelihood. But this is where having more research and combining with Dr. Habib and others that are starting to build this knowledge and data sets, I bet we could start to make stronger inferences over more animals, populations, and regions. Great question.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. And I have a question here for Dr. Habib. Have there been any challenges in trying to work with the government to ensure biodiversity considerations are considered during road planning and development? And what has worked to convince them that this is important?
So it took us almost 10 years to build the first mitigation measures. So the case was in the courts and everybody was behind that particular structure. So for first structure, it took us almost 10 years. But now the government is so sensitized that if there is any wildlife corridor, if there's any wildlife sensitive areas, most of the national level. So we have two different types of road building agencies. We have a federal road building agencies and we have a localized state level road building agencies. So federal road building agency, which builds the most of the roads, high speed roads in our country, I think they are 90% on track now. So they will not make any structure, any road without a wildlife mitigation measures. And if they will try to avoid, if there is no chance of avoid, then they will go for the mitigation measures. But we have still not reached to the state level building agencies because there's a huge variation. These are very poor agencies. They don't have too much of the budget for the roads. So there are other issues which are going popping in. So we have to think about how to get to them, how to enhance their budgets for when they are making about these roads, because they can't sustain these costly mitigation measures in their projects. So that's a challenge. And if we are able to concentrate on them, and if we are able to work with them, I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And it's not the roads only, it's the railway lines, it's the canals. They all fragment our habitat. So we're just thinking about the roads, and we are also working on the railway lines. But the difference between the roads and railway lines is the road has a random traffic. Anybody come in anytime. But the advantage with the railway lines is they have a traffic at specific times. You know where the gap is. You can develop that gap when your animals are active. Like we know that animals are active in a protected area from 8 to 10 in the morning. And if you have a very less railway traffic going through park at that particular time, you can have a lot of animals going from one place to other place. But there are a lot of challenges which are there. I think which together we can come, like we have to work together and concentrate on these particular challenges.
Thank you, Dr. Habib. Tremi, do we have time for one more question or we got to wrap up?
We're quite near the end, but let's try for another. We got so many amazing questions here.
I know there's so many. I think this is for either or both of you, but unlike elephants, tigers don't seem to have a particular crossing point. How do we identify locations for underpasses/overpasses?
I think no, that's not the case. Tigers are very specific for using these tigers have crossing structures, and tigers don't have a crossing structures when you have a continuous forest. But outside forest, they are forced to use these corridors, and these corridors are restricted, so that they have a specific crossing zones.
And then, oh, Neil, did you have something to add?
I was just going to say ditto what Dr. Habib said.
And I'm really curious about this last question, so I'm just going to squeeze it in. And I'm sorry for the timing, but for poachers, an overpass seems like the perfect place as a hunting spot. And they can just wait for animals. So is there any mitigation efforts or prevention efforts around this?
Yeah, very interesting question. So that's a challenge, not only for hunting place for people, but hunting place for animals also, because that's why we call it a prey trap hypothesis. Maybe if a tiger comes to know that, oh, this is an easy place, all the deer will cross here, I don't need to run for 5 kilometers to search for an animal. So it's both for tigers and it's both for the people. Yes, you can't leave these structures. You have to monitor them. So in our country, wherever we have these mitigation measures, the local forest department ensures that they have a vigil on these underpasses and overpasses so that people don't come for hunting at these particular places. And it's a risky, it becomes a very risky business for the forest department, but that is a very important care which we have to take, especially for a country like ours, that there are too many people. Okay, so you are just a kilometer away from an underpass or an overpass, so you have to be more vigilant.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carter, did you have anything to add before we wrap up?
No, I think that's an excellent point.
Okay, well, thank you both so much. Really appreciate your time and presentations and your thoughtful answers to these questions, and appreciate everyone's very thoughtful questions as well. So I'll hand it back to Tremi to wrap up.
Thank you so much, Kate, and thank you, Dr. Habib and Dr. Carter. This has just been so amazing to see these presentations, the numbers for every example that you give, the number of overpasses, the number of crossings, the number of roads is just spectacular to see. So I just really appreciate it, and we will do our best to answer the questions after the webinar today to see if we can get, there were so many questions, we'd like to try to get some answers out to you all. So, and please look out for our next webinar in the series. We haven't placed a date yet or a specific topic, but we are probably looking at some other cats in other parts of the world. So thanks for being with us today, and it's been a very enlightening session, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.